the order property. We can use the order property to sort the flex as we like. So this is how the order property looks like. At this point, for the flex number 1, we assign it the value 2. The flex number 2, we assign number 3. Flex number 3, we assigned number 4. Flex number 4, we assign number 1. So the order property is used to rearrange the order of properties. So let's jump into the code and see what changes we can make. So once again, I've created a document type, HTML. I've opened HTML head and style, and I've closed them in the same order right at the bottom. So I'm just going to highlight the style and we can walk through it. Here in the style, I've opened the body selector that contains the font family, text, decoration color, background color, padding left, and padding right. And for the text, I've given the topic this color value. The font size is 60 points. For the paragraph, the font size is 20 points. And the paragraph color is this value. Further down, we have our flex container and the display is flex. We assign stretch to its align items, so which means we are stretching the items, and we gave the background color this value. So further down, we declare a flex container for the div. The border color is this value. The width is 100 pixels. Margin is 10 pixels. Text align, we put it at the center. The line height, 75 pixels. And the font size is 30 pixels. So we close the style, we close the head. And remember, we're going to close the HTML finally. So further down in the body, I'm just going to highlight the body and we can look into it. So further down in the body, we have our topic. We had a paragraph. We had a div that contains our class, which is a flex container. And we have style orders 1 to 4. And we have the values that we have given to it. For position 1, we assigned number 4. For position 2, we assign number 1. For position 3, we assign number 2. For position 4, we assign number 3. We can change this around and see. First of all, let's go back to the page and see how it looks at the moment. Right now, this is how the order property looks like. We're going to make the changes and we're going to come back to this page. For the first position, we want to change it to 1. And for the second position, we want to change it to, say, 3. We want to change the third position to 5. And we want to change the fourth position to 2. Now let's save the file and jump back to the HTML page. Here we are at the HTML page. We're going to refresh the page and see how it looks like. So you can see it has actually changed. First position, we gave it 1. Second position, we gave it 4. Third position, we gave it 2. And the fourth position, we gave it 3. Grid columns and grid rows. The link above contains commonly used values for grid template columns and grid template rows. A length unit such as pixel or EM is used to configure a fixed size, where 220 pixels is a good example. A numeric percentage is used to specify a percentage size, for example, 20%. Numeric FR units set up a flex factor unit denoted by FR that instructs the browser to allocate a fraction of the remaining space. The size is automatically configured to hold the most content. Min, max sets the size range to be greater than or equal to the min value and less than or equal to the max value. A flex factor can be used to set the max amount. Repetition amount and format values cause the volume or row to be repeated a certain number of times. The format value is used by the keyword or numeric value to configure the volume or row. The autofill keyword instructs you to repeat but not go over capacity. A good example is repeat autofill with the values of 250 pixels. Configure grid items. The grid row property configures the area in rows that is reserved for the item in the grid, whereas the grid column property configures the area in columns that is reserved for the item in the grid. And finally, Grid line numbers identify the starting and ending line number separated by a character. A 5-item grid layout. CSS grid layout excels at dividing a page into major regions or defining the relationship in terms of size, position, and layer between parts of a control built from HTML primitives. Like tables, grid layout enables an author to align elements into columns and rows. How do you make a layout grid in CSS? It all starts by creating a grid in your grid container. First of all, for grid container, we create a grid container by declaring display grid or display inline grid on an element. For grid tracks, we define rows and columns on our grid with the grid template rows and grid template columns properties. Let's jump to the code and explore 5 items grid layouts. Here we are in the code. I've created a document type HTML, open HTML head style, and close them accordingly right at the bottom. So let's go back to the top and highlight everything within the style. Right from the top, we had a body selector where we declare the font family, text decoration color, background color, padding left and padding right. And further down for our text, we had this color value for our topic, we had this color value for our paragraph, and for our H1, we have 60 points for our font size. For our paragraph, we have 20 points. And for our div, we have this color value. And further down, we declared our dot grid container and its display is set to grid. The gap is 10 pixels. Background color is set to this value. Padding is set to 10 pixels. The next is a grid item. For the grid item, we give the background color this color value. And the text align is left. The padding is 20 pixels, where the font size is 30 pixels. We had our item number 1, where the grid column is set between 1 to 2, and the grid row is in the position number 1. We have our second item, and the grid column is at the position number 3, and it spans from 1 to 2. We have our fifth item, it spans from 1 to 3, and its grid row is at number 3. Okay, let's make some changes to these items. Let's say item number 2, we want to span the grid row from 2 to 3. Let's change it to 3. Let's save the file and jump back to our HTML page. Here on our HTML page, we're going to refresh and see the difference. So for our second item, the grid column was 2, and we changed to 3. It now occupies the space of 5. So now it becomes 3. So it's 1, 2, and 3. So we can go on and make changes to all these other grid layouts. Progressive enhancement with grid. Progressive enhancement is a design philosophy that aims to provide a baseline of essential content and functionality to as many users as possible while delivering the best potential experience only to users of the most modern browsers capable of running all the required code. Progressive enhancement is used in the front ends of MediaWiki-powered sites like Wikipedia because it is readable, navigable, and even editable using the basic HTML interface without the use of styling or scripts. With progressive enhancement strategy, you can configure web page layouts with normal flow or floats for browsers and devices that do not support grid. It is used to configure a feature query with grid layouts for modern browsers. CSS viewport is defined as the visible area on a Windows screen that refers to mobile device displays. Using the CSS meta tag with viewport as an effective way to improve the appearance of web pages on smaller screens. The viewport does not have the same dimensions as the original web page. The viewport meta tag is used to zoom out and scale the web page, which is the default action for the most mobile devices. Viewport meta tag is an Apple extension that is used to configure display on mobile devices. It also specifies the width and initial scale of the browser viewports. Telephone and text message hyperlinks are links you tap to call a number on a phone-capable device. Similar to an anchor link, you tap to probably go to another page. They've been around for a while. Many devices, for example, will recognize phone numbers and link them automatically, but this is not always the case. There is enough web traffic on mobile devices and a vast number of desktop apps capable of making calls. I personally found the telephone and text message hyperlinks very helpful. You just click on it and make a phone call instantaneously. Responsive web design. Responsive web design refers to the use of CSS and HTML to resize, hide, shrink, enlarge, or move content so that it looks good on every screen. It is a web design approach that aims to make web pages render well on a variety of devices and window or screen sizes ranging from small to large in order to ensure usability and satisfaction. Fluid layout, CSS media queries, and flexible images are among the techniques employed. Mobile-first approach. Mobile-first design, as the name implies, is an approach in which web designers begin product design for mobile devices first. This can be accomplished by first sketching or prototyping the web app's design for the smallest screen size and then gradually progressing to larger screen sizes. It was Luke Wroblewski that coined the term responsive design layout strategy. The mobile-first methodology set up a single-column page layout for smartphones with narrow screens. If necessary, run the test on the small browser window. It enlarges the browser viewport until the design breaks and needs to be reconstructed for a more pleasing display. This is where you might need to write a media query. Continue to enlarge the browser viewport until the design breaks, then add more media queries. CSS media queries. Media queries in CSS3 extended the idea of CSS2 media types. Instead of looking for a device type, they look at the device's capabilities. Media queries can be used to check many things such as viewport width and height and device width and height. Using media queries is a popular technique to provide a tailored style sheet for desktop, laptop, tablet, and mobile phones like iPhone and Android phones. Responsive layout with media queries. Responsive design refers to a site or application design that responds to the environment in which it is viewed. It encompasses a number of CSS and HTML features and techniques and is now essentially just how we build websites by default. Media queries are a key part of responsive web design as they allow you to create different layouts depending on the size of the viewport, but they can also be used to detect other things about the environment your site is running on. For example, where the user is using a touch screen rather than a mouse. Media queries allows you to apply CSS styles depending on a device's general type, such as print versus screen, or other characteristics such as screen resolution or browser viewport width. Responsive grid layout with media queries. To create a responsive grid, we can put the designer style inside the media queries. This will make the grid items follow the previous project layout when the screen size is larger than or equal to 700 pixels. And on top of these media queries, we can also use the grid layout when the screen size is less than 700 pixels. Flexible images. The Flexbox or Flexible Box model in CSS is a one-dimensional layout model that has flexible and efficient layouts with distributed spaces among items to control their alignment structure. It is a layout model that provides an easy and clean way to arrange items within a container. A flex container appends items to fill available free space or shrinks them to prevent overflow. Most importantly, the Flexbox layout is direction agnostic as opposed to the regular layouts block, which is vertically based, and inline, which is horizontally based. Responsive images HTML picture element. The HTML picture element gives web developers more flexibility in specifying image resources. The picture element contains one or more source elements, each referring to different images through the src set attribute. This way, the browser can browse the image that best fits the current view or device. Basically, there are 5 common elements that great images typically have. One is good use of light, another is the good use of color, a captivating moment, correct composition for the given situation, and the photographer's choice of distance to their subject. Responsive images, IMG element sizes, and src set attributes. The HTML image element property src set is a string which identifies one or more image candidate strings separated using commas, each specifying image resources to be used under given circumstances. The src set and sizes attributes work together to create responsive images. Responsive images, the loading attribute. An HTML attribute is a piece of markup language used to adjust the behavior or display of an HTML element. For example, attributes can be used to change the color, size, or functionality of HTML elements. The loading attribute specifies whether a browser should load an image immediately or to defer loading of off-screen image until, for example, the user scrolls near them. Testing mobile display options. We can test with a mobile device or with a desktop browser. How to test mobile display? 1. Launch Chrome and navigate to the website to be tested on mobile. 2. Open the developer tools available in Settings, More Tools, Developer Tools, select the device toggle bar, and finally select the device to be emulated from the available list of Android and OS devices. CSS debugging tips. Manually check for syntax errors. Use W3C CSS validator to check for syntax errors. Configure temporary background colors. Configure temporary borders. Use CSS comments to find the unexpected. And finally, don't expect your pages to look exactly the same in all browsers. Be patient. Chapter 8 Summary. In this 8th chapter, we examine responsive layout basics, taken from our main topic, Basics of Web Design. This chapter expanded your CSS and HTML skill set. You configured web pages with CSS flexible box layout known as Flexbox. You configure web pages with CSS grid layout. You configured web pages for mobile display using the viewport meta tag. You applied responsive web design techniques with CSS media queries and feature queries. You applied responsive image techniques, including the picture elements, and you explored techniques for testing the mobile display of a web page. In Summary Chapter 8, we examine the following. We examine the CSS flexible box layout known as Flexbox. We examine diagram of a flex container, the justified content property and more Flexbox properties. We configured flex items and CSS grid layouts. We configured grid columns and grid rows. We configured grid items and grid areas. We configured progressive enhancement with grid viewport meta tag. We examined telephone and text message hyperlinks. We examined responsive web design. we looked at mobile-first approach, CSS media queries, responsive layout with media queries, responsive grid layout with media queries, and flexible images. In responsive images, we examined HTML picture elements, IMG element sizes, and src set attributes, as well as the loading attributes. We also tested for mobile display options, and finally, we looked at CSS debugging tips. We have now come to the end of the 8th chapter of Basics of Web Design. Thank you all for your attendance.